The thrum of the radial engine vibrates through the aluminum floor, rattling the bones in your feet. It's 4 a.m., still dark, and the air flooding the ready room is thick with the smell of high-octane aviation fuel, sweat, and stale coffee. You look down at your chartboard, the grease pencil notations for wind and course seeming impossibly small under the dim red light. Out there, beyond the thin steel skin of your carrier, is 3,000 miles of empty, dark water. And somewhere in that emptiness, the most powerful naval strike force ever assembled is hunting for you. Ever wonder what it truly felt like to solve an impossible problem with nothing but dated technology and sheer nerve? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you find the journey we're about to take is a valuable one. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today and which specific military mission or battle from history leaves you completely speechless. Now, let's journey back in time and deconstruct the story of a lost world. You are an American naval aviator on the morning of June 4th, 1942, and you are, by every rational metric, already beaten. The enemy you are sailing to intercept isn't just another fleet. It is the Kido Butai, the first air fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy. This force is an undefeated, almost mythical entity, a samurai sword that has carved a bloody path across the entire Pacific Ocean. You know their record because it has been written in the wreckage of your own navy. You think of December 7th, 1941, 6 months. In just 6 months, these same carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, under the command of Admiral Nagumo, struck Pearl Harbor, paralyzing the US Pacific Fleet. They didn't stop. They supported the invasions of the Philippines and Malaya. They annihilated the British port at Darwin, Australia. They swept into the Indian Ocean, sinking 2 British heavy cruisers and the carrier HMS Hermes with such operational ease it looked like a training exercise. The Kido Butai has not just won battles, it has erased entire fleets from the map without suffering a single significant loss in return. The tactical paradox of your mission is terrifyingly simple. Their tools are better than yours, and their artists are more practiced. You are likely flying an F-4F Wildcat. It's a tough, armored-plated brawler, but you know it's not a Mitsubishi A6M0. The Zero is a legend. You've heard the reports from the pilots who survived the Coral Sea. The Zero climbs like a rocket, turns on a dime, and has a combat range that seems to defy physics. In a one-on-one dogfight, your only advantage is that your Wildcat can maybe survive a few hits and dive away. The Zero sets the terms of the fight. You just react. If you're not a fighter pilot, your reality is even grimmer. You might be in the SBD Dauntless, a solid, reliable dive bomber. It's the best tool you have. But if you're a torpedo pilot, you are climbing into a TBD Devastator. You know, and your squadron mates know that the plane is obsolete. It's slow, underarmed, and its torpedoes are notoriously unreliable. It is a flying coffin. And then there are the pilots. The Japanese aviators you are about to face are, quite simply, the best in the world. They are the Kessen, the decisive battle a doctrine made real. They have thousands of flight hours. They have spent a decade perfecting the art of carrier aviation. They have spent the last 6 months putting those skills to the test against live targets. Their gender, their source code of attack, named for Minoru Gender, the architect of Pearl Harbor, is flawless. They are veterans. They are precise. They are lethal. You look around your own ready room. Your pilots are brave, but they are, compared to the enemy, green. Many have never seen combat. Your entire navy is on the back foot. And your fleet? Your command has scraped together every operational hull it has. You have Task Force 16 with Enterprise and Hornet, and you have Task Force 17 centered on the Yorktown. The Yorktown is a ghost. She was declared sunk at the Battle of the Coral Sea just weeks ago. She limped into Pearl Harbor, with a hole in her flight deck and a broken back, a 90-day repair job. The yard crews at Pearl, in a superhuman effort, patched her up in 72 hours. She is operational, but she is wounded. 3 carriers, 3 patched up, outnumbered carriers against the 4 veterans of the Kido Butai. The Japanese plan, Operation MY, is a masterpiece of imperial ambition. They intend to seize Midway Atoll, draw out what's left of your fleet, and annihilate it. They have battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, the largest armada yet assembled. They have complete confidence. Your only advantage is a secret. A small group of cryptanalysts in a basement in Pearl Harbor Station Hypo has done the impossible. They broke the Japanese naval code JN25. You know Nagumo is coming to Midway, but knowing where they are and beating them are 2 different universes. Your planes have a limited combat radius. You must launch at the perfect moment, fly for hundreds of miles over featureless ocean, find a moving fleet, fight through the best fighter screen in the world, and land a hit. If your timing is off by 10 minutes, if your navigation is off by 2 degrees, you will fly until your tanks run dry and fall into the sea. This is the tactical paradox of Midway. On paper, you cannot win. The mission is an impossibility. You are the bait, the target, and the last line of defense all at once. And as the first light of dawn cracks the horizon, you hear the call. Pilots, man your planes. The world fractures into a storm of noise and vibration. You are on the flight deck of the USS Enterprise as she turns hard into the wind, her bow pitching into the heavy Pacific swell. It's 7 o'clock. The call, launch aircraft, echoes from the loudspeakers. A metallic squawk barely audible over the howl of the wind and the percussive roar of 18-cylinder Wright Cyclone engines. One by one, your fellow pilots are catapulted into the brightening sky. F-4, F Wildcats, TBD Devastators, and your own SBD Dauntless Dive Bombers. The deck beneath your feet is a scene of frantic, controlled chaos. Deckhands in coloured jerseys sprint across the non-skid surface. Exhaust fumes sting your eyes, and the smell of hot oil and salt spray is overpowering. You are launching. But where are you going? The tactical problem is one of simple, terrifying geometry. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Task Force 16, is acting on a single, vital piece of intelligence. At 5:34, a PBY Catalina scouting plane, call sign PBY-4Y1, radioed in a contact. Enemy carriers sighted. This was followed by a frantic update. 2 carriers and main body bearing 135, distance 180, course 090. The hunt is on. But this isn't a pin on a map. This is a search problem spanning over 60,000 square miles of open ocean, an area larger than the state of Georgia. The Japanese fleet is a moving target, traveling at over 20 knots. Your own carrier is also moving. Every calculation, every course plotted on your chartboard is a high-stakes prediction based on imperfect data. Spruance makes his first monumental gamble of the day. The Japanese are at the absolute maximum range of your aircraft. He knows this. He knows that launching now, at 7 a.m., means his planes will be desperately low on fuel by the time they return. His fighter escorts, the Wildcats, have notoriously short legs. They might not make it back at all. The by-the-book solution is to close the distance, to wait until 9 a.m. for a shorter, safer, more coordinated strike. But Spruance doesn't wait. He has a hunch. He understands the Kido Butai is not just a target, it's a weapons system. And right now, that weapon is pointed at Midway Atoll. He knows Nagumo has already launched his first wave to strike the island. That means Nagumo's decks are, for a brief window, relatively quiet. Spruance makes the decision to launch everything, right now, to catch the Japanese fleet while it is recovering and rearming. It is a decision of incredible audacity. You and your squadron are now part of this all-out strike. But the launch is not clean. The coordination breaks down immediately. The Hornet's strike package, 35 Dauntlesses and 10 Wildcats under the command of Commander Stanhope Ring, takes off and climbs to 20,000 feet, heading west. Their vector is 265 degrees, a hunch based on a doctrinal belief that the Japanese will be north of the reported contact. They are wrong. They are flying on a phantom course, a flight to nowhere, burning precious fuel over an empty ocean. You are in the Enterprise group. Your air group commander, Lieutenant Commander C. Wade McClusky, is leading you on the reported vector of 240 degrees. You fly for an hour, then 2. The tension in the cockpit is a physical weight. Your eyes, scanning the endless expanse of blue, start to play tricks on you. You see flecks of whitecap and mistake them for the wake of a ship. You see a cloud shadow and your heart leaps, thinking it's the Kido Butai. But there is nothing, only the blue desert. At 9:20, you reach the point of intercept. There is no one here. The Japanese fleet is not where it was supposed to be. Your fuel gauges are dropping. This is the moment where missions fail. This is the moment where hundreds of pilots following orders would turn for home. You are beyond your briefed combat radius. Your fighter escort has already broken off, their fuel critically low. You are alone. McClusky, leading your formation of 33 Dauntless dive bombers, now faces a choice that will decide the fate of the entire Pacific War. He has no new orders. Radio silence is absolute. He has 2 options: turn south towards Midway, hoping to land there, or turn back east to Enterprise. Both are safe decisions. Both mean the mission has failed. But McClusky has a hunch. He is a professional, a by-the-book aviator, but he is also a hunter. He reasons the Japanese fleet must have changed course. He also reasons that at 7 a.m. they were spotted launching a strike at Midway. That means, to recover those planes, the fleet must be proceeding towards Midway. But his most critical thought is that he spotted a lone Japanese destroyer, the Arashi, moments earlier, steaming hard to the northeast. Why was it alone? Perhaps it was chasing a US submarine. And if so, where was it going? It was rejoining its fleet. McClusky makes his decision. He ignores his fuel gauge. He ignores the return vector. He breaks all doctrine and, acting on a single, inspired guess, turns his entire formation right to the northwest. Vector 315. He is not flying to where the Japanese were. He is flying to where he thinks they must be now. He is betting your life, his life, and the outcome of the battle on this single, intuitive correction. Every minute that ticks by, the red needles on your fuel dials creep lower. You are now flying on borrowed time, committing yourself to a one-way trip, trusting in a hunch from a man you can only see as a small speck in the sky ahead of you. You are no longer an American pilot. The perspective shifts. You are now standing on the bridge of the Japanese flagship Akagi, the crown jewel of the Kido Butai. The time is 7:45. The deck beneath your feet thrums with the power of a ship at the apex of its destiny. You are Chuichi Nagumo, Vice Admiral of the 1st Air Fleet. But you are not an aviator. You are a cautious, meticulous battleship admiral, thrust into command of this new, terrifyingly fast form of warfare. You trust your subordinates, especially the brilliant young man at your side, Commander Minoru Genda, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. This morning, your plan was proceeding like clockwork. At 4:30, you launched your first strike against Midway Atoll. Now, your immediate concern is the report from that strike, which arrives via radio from Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga. His message is a shock. Midway defenses are still effective. A second strike is required. You look at Genda. The air is thick with unspoken tension. A second strike? This complicates the doctrine. Gender, ever the aggressive airman, is decisive. He advises an immediate follow-up. Your reserve aircraft, currently armed and ready on Akagi and Kaga, must be rearmed. They are currently holding Type 91 torpedoes, optimized for sinking ships. They must be swapped for 800-kilogram high-explosive land attack bombs. You nod. The order is given. Commence rearming for a second strike on Midway. A klaxon sounds. Down in the hangar decks, the scene explodes into a frantic Herculean effort. You don't see it, but you can feel it. You are on a warship, and the procedures are rigid. Arming an aircraft is not simple. Heavy-set ordnance crews, sweating in the poorly ventilated hangars, begin the agonizing process. They unfasten the massive 2,000-pound torpedoes from the bellies of the Type 97 Kate bombers. Using manual hoists, they lower these weapons, live, sensitive and packed with explosives, onto ordnance carts. There is no undo button. Each torpedo must be carefully wheeled back, secured in its magazine rack, and the carts returned for the bombs. The hangar is a nightmare of logistics. The bombs are in a separate magazine. The crews, already working against the clock, must now hoist the 800-kilogram land bombs, wheel them back through the cluttered deck, and meticulously winch them into place. The air fills with the smell of hydraulic fluid, sweat, and the sharp tang of metal on metal. This is not a 10-minute job. It is a 90-minute evolution, minimum. And you have just committed your 2 best carriers to it. Then, at 7:58, your world stops. A radio operator hands you a slip of paper. It is the delayed report from the Tones number. 4 scout plane, the one that launched late. Sight what appears to be 10 enemy ships, 10 degrees, 240 miles from Midway. A chill silence falls over the bridge. 10 ships. This is it. The American fleet. The real target. Your entire mission, Operation MI, was designed to bring these ships to battle, and you have just ordered your primary weapons, your torpedo bombers, to be disarmed. You look at Gender. His face is a mask of intense concentration. The tactical situation has inverted in a single second. Gender's mind is a razor. His advice is immediate and again aggressive. Prepare to attack the enemy fleet. But this is not a simple order. You are now trapped in a fatal loop of your own doctrine. You cannot launch now. Half your planes are armed with land bombs. The other half are still carrying torpedoes, but the pilots are not yet briefed. And worse, your first strike, Tomonaga's group, is returning from Midway. They are low on fuel, many are shot up, and they must land. They will be in the landing pattern by 8:30. You are paralyzed. Your flight decks, the source of your power, are now your single greatest liability. You cannot launch a new strike while recovering your old one. This is the failure, not of one man, but of the system. Gender, the pragmatist, advises you to recover the Midway strike, rearm every plane with the correct anti-ship ordnance, and then launch one single, coordinated, devastating blow against the American carriers. It is the by-the-book solution. It is the only solution. You agree. You give the second fateful order of the morning. Cease rearming with land bombs. Rearm again with torpedoes. Prepare for an anti-ship strike. Recover the Midway wave as they arrive. Down in the hangars, the order creates sheer chaos. The exhausted crews, who just spent 40 minutes lowering torpedoes and hauling up bombs, are now told to reverse the process. But there is no time. The bombs cannot be safely returned to the magazines while torpedoes are being brought back up. The procedures collapse. The officers, desperate to meet the new deadline, make a critical decision. Leave the bombs where they are. The hangar decks of Akagi and Kaga are now, quite literally, an arsenal without a fuse box. Live 800-kilogram land bombs are stacked on carts, unsecured. Massive anti-ship torpedoes are being wheeled past them. Fuel lines are run across the deck to top off the Zeros of the combat air patrol. And in the middle of it all, mechanics are servicing the engines of the very planes that are supposed to carry these weapons. You have created a floating tinderbox. Every single element needed for an apocalyptic explosion, fuel, oxygen, and unsecured high explosives, is now packed tightly into a steel box. You stand on the bridge, a prisoner of your own meticulous process. All you can do is wait. You wait for Tomonaga's planes to land. You wait for your crews to rearm. You wait to spot the enemy. You are the most powerful admiral afloat, and you are utterly helpless, waiting for the clock to run out. The world shrinks to the confines of your cockpit. You are an aviator in Torpedo Squadron 8, VT-8, launching from the deck of the USS Hornet. The aircraft you are flying is the Douglas TBD Devastator, and you are keenly aware that its name is a dark prophecy. In 1937, it was a marvel of naval aviation. In 1942, it is a death trap. Your only forward-firing weapon is a single .30 caliber machine gun. Your defense is a single .30 caliber gun in the rear, manned by your radio man. Your top speed, when you are clean, is 200 knots, but you are not clean. A 2,000-pound Mark 13 torpedo is strapped to your belly, a massive source of drag that slows you to a crawl. Your maximum speed during this attack run will be barely 110 knots. A modern bicycle could almost keep up. You are flying a mission of sacrifice. You just don't know the scale of it yet. Your squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron, is a man of fierce, almost spiritual conviction. He is a Lakota Sioux descendant from South Dakota, and he leads with an intensity that borders on the fanatical. During the launch this morning, he was part of that confused Hornet strike package, the one that headed west on a phantom vector. But Waldron refused to follow. You heard his final determined radio call to the Hornet Air Group commander, "I am going south." He was breaking formation. He was disobeying the strike plan. He was, like McClusky, miles away, betting everything on a hunch. He believed the admirals had miscalculated. He believed the Japanese were to the southwest. He told you and your 14 squadron mates before takeoff, "My greatest fear is that we will fail to find them. If we find them, we will attack. If we are the only ones to find them, we will still attack." For 2 hours, you have flown over that same blue desert that mocked McClusky's dive bombers. But Waldron's compass was true. At 9:18, your radio man's voice crackles in your headset, sharp with adrenaline. "Ship sighting. Bearing 090. You bank your heavy plane and see it. It is not a ship. It is the Kido Butai, all 4 of Admiral Nagumo's carriers, surrounded by a ring of battleships and cruisers, their wakes cutting white scars into the deep blue. It is the most beautiful and terrifying sight you have ever witnessed. You have found them, and you are completely, suicidally alone. There are no wildcats. Your fighter escort is miles away, still on the flight to nowhere, their fuel tanks draining. There are no dauntless dive bombers screaming down from 20,000 feet. There is no coordination. There is just you. 15 antiquated, slow-moving torpedo planes. On the bridge of the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo sees you. His lookouts have been screaming for minutes. To him, you are a nuisance, not a threat. You are a disorganized, minor attack. It confirms his decision. These Americans are desperate and launching piecemeal attacks. His own massive, coordinated counterstrike will brush this aside. You don't know this. All you know is your duty. Waldron's voice comes over the radio, calm and final. "We will go in. We will attack. I'm going in now." You push the stick forward. You and your 14 squadron mates drop from 1,000 feet down to the wave tops, a sea-level attack. This is torpedo doctrine. You must fly this low so the torpedoes don't shatter when they hit the water. You must also fly in a straight level line for the last 1,000 yards to aim. You have just made yourself the perfect target. And now they see you. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol. It is not one or two fighters. It is an insect swarm of Mitsubishi Zeros. They are the best fighters in the world, flown by the best pilots. And you have just shown up to their front door. They have been orbiting at 10,000 feet, waiting for dive bombers. But you are here, low, and an easy kill. Like a cascading waterfall, the Zeros dive. They are not pulling down one or two fighters. Your tiny squadron has just commanded the attention of the entire Japanese defensive screen. Dozens of Zeros descend from their high-altitude perches, leaving the sky above the Kido Butai wide open. They are coming for you. The first pass is a blur of red meatball insignias and yellow tracer fire. You hear the thwack, thwack, thwack of 7.7mm rounds punching through your TBD's unarmored aluminum skin. A plane to your left vanishes in a bright orange flash as a 20mm cannon shell finds its fuel tank. Your rear gunner is firing, his .30 caliber sounding like a pop gun in the hurricane of noise. You are not flying an aircraft, you are flying a torpedo. Your only job is to get this fish into the water. You grip the yoke, knuckles white, trying to keep the plane steady. The air is so thick with flak from the Japanese cruisers that it looks like a black shimmering curtain. You are flying through it. You see Waldron's plane. It is stitched from rudder to engine by cannon fire. It lurches, a wing dips, and it cartwheels into the ocean. He is gone. Another plane, then another. They are being annihilated. This is not a battle. It is an execution. The Zeros are lining up, taking their time, practicing their gunnery. You see a plane's tail section shredded. Another's engine catch fire. You are surrounded by your friends, and they are dying. You hold on. You are inside the flak. You are inside the Zeros. You are almost there. You line up the Soryu in your rudimentary sight. You press the release. The TBD shudders, lighter now, as the 2,000-pound torpedo drops away. You bank hard, a useless, desperate maneuver to escape. You are too late. The Zeros are on you. Your engine seizes. Smoke fills the cockpit. You hear, or perhaps feel, your radio man getting hit. The ocean rushes up. You have failed. Not a single torpedo from VT-8 hits a target. Minutes later, VT-6 from the Enterprise arrives. They too are alone. They too are massacred. Then, VT-3 from the Yorktown. The same result. In the span of 30 minutes, 47 American torpedo bombers have attacked. 41 have been shot out of the sky, no hits. On the Akagi, Nagumo is triumphant. The American attack has been a pathetic failure. His decks are clear. His Zeros are landing, rearming, their pilots laughing. He has won. But John Waldron, in his death, has done something no one could have planned. His sacrifice, and the sacrifice of the other two torpedo squadrons, has pulled the entire Japanese fighter screen, every last Zero, down to the sea. They are low on fuel. They are low on ammunition. And most importantly, they are low on altitude. The sky above the Kido Butai, the ceiling of the trap, is now completely, totally, and fatally empty. And then, at 10 a.m. you see it. It's not a ship, it's a line. A single thin white scar on the endless blue, a wake of foam. It's the Japanese destroyer Arashi, the very one you spotted earlier, now racing northeast to rejoin its fleet after chasing an American submarine. McClusky's hunch has paid off. He has not just found a clue, he has found a thread. And you are about to follow that thread to the heart of the Japanese Empire. Your formation turns, following the destroyer's wake as if it were a road map. The tension in your cockpit is a physical presence, a crushing weight on your chest. Minutes pass. They feel like hours. And then, at 10:20 a.m., the ocean changes. The blue desert gives way to the Kido Butai. The sight is breathtaking. It is not a fleet. It is a city of steel. 4 of the most powerful carriers in the world, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, sailing in a perfect, arrogant box formation, surrounded by their screen of battleships and cruisers. You have found them, but as you stare down, a chilling, terrifying realization washes over you. Where is the combat air patrol? Where are the Zeros? You are a dive bomber, the prime target for any fighter. You are flying at high altitude, slow, predictable. You should be dead already. You scan the sky, nothing. You look down, squinting, and you see them. You see the entire Japanese fighter screen, dozens of Zeros, like a swarm of angry gnats, thousands of feet below you. They are at sea level, down on the deck, ripping apart the last of the American torpedo planes from VT-3. This is the moment. This is the 5-minute window that history will hinge upon. You have arrived at the exact second that the sacrifices of Torpedo Squadron 8, 6, and 3 have borne fruit. They have, at the cost of their own lives, pulled the entire Japanese defense out of position. And what are the Japanese carriers doing? You look closer. Their decks are not clear. They are covered in aircraft. You see the Kate torpedo bombers being rearmed for the counterstrike. You see fuel lines snaked across the decks. You see ordnance carts, the very bombs and torpedoes that were part of Nagumo's Paralysis, stacked and waiting. They are not a weapon. They are a tinderbox. On the radio, McClusky's voice is impossibly calm. He assigns the targets. He will take his squadron, Enterprise Air Group 6, for the Kaga. Lieutenant Dick Best, leading the Yorktown's Bombing 3, will take the flagship, the Akagi. The command is given: attack. You are in Dick Best's squadron. You push the nose of your Dauntless over. The SBD tips past 70 degrees, pointing its nose almost straight down at the ocean. The feeling is not of falling. It is of being flung at the planet. Your stomach is in your throat. You open your perforated dive brakes, and the aircraft begins to scream, a high-pitched, tearing shriek that will haunt the nightmares of every sailor who hears it. You are now a human bomb, falling at 280 knots. The Akagi fills your windscreen. It is massive, her deck painted with the enormous red meatball of the rising sun. You can see the pilots, the deckhands, scrambling in panic. They are looking up, their faces white with terror. They have only just seen you, and still no one is shooting. The flak is sporadic, inaccurate. The Zeros are 18,000 feet below, struggling to climb, but they are too slow. They will not get here. You are completely unopposed. You are the embodiment of pure distilled tactical surprise. Your altimeter unwinds. 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet. The Akagi is no longer a ship. It is your entire universe. You are aiming for the red circle on her deck, for the offset island superstructure. 3,000 feet. You are so low you can see the details of the planes parked on her deck. You toggle the bomb release. Pickle. The 1,000-pound bomb drops away. The SBD, suddenly free of the weight, leaps. You pull back on the stick with all your strength. The G-forces are immense, a giant hand crushing you into your seat. The blood drains from your head. Your vision flickers to grey. You fight to stay conscious as the plane bottoms out, skimming the waves. The Akagi's radio masts flashing past you just feet overhead. You have done it. Behind you, you hear your radio man shouting. You do not look back. At 10:22 a.m., McClusky's bombs strike the Kaga, At 10:26 a.m., your bomb, or perhaps it was Dick Best's, or your other squadron mates, finds the Akagi. At the same time, miles away, the Yorktown's other dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, hit the Soryu. In less than 5 minutes, 3 of the 4 carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor are no longer ships. They are volcanoes. You have just pulled out of your dive, the G-force still pinning you to your seat as you jink hard to port, skimming the ocean's surface. Your radio man is shouting, but you can't hear him over the roar of your engine and the thumping of your own heart. You are alive. You twist your neck for a 1-second look back. You did not just hit a ship. You have just struck a volcano. This is the Tinderbox Effect. The 1,000-pound bomb you just released was not the killing blow. It was the match. The real weapon that is now destroying the Japanese fleet is Admiral Nagumo's own indecision. The scene you are fleeing is one of apocalyptic, cascading failure. Let's deconstruct the hits. At 10:22 a.m., your squadron mates from the Enterprise hit the Kaga. She is a massive 38,000-ton vessel, and she absorbs 4, perhaps 5, 1,000-pound bombs. The first one hits the aft section. The second and third strike near the bridge, one of them obliterating the command staff and turning the island superstructure into a shrapnel-filled charnel house. But it is the fourth bomb that does the work. It hits the forward midship section. It is a semi-armor-piercing bomb designed to penetrate. It punches through the wooden flight deck as if it were paper. It tears through the thin steel of the hangar deck below, and it detonates inside the tinderbox. You must understand what it is detonating in. The Kaga's hangar deck, as a result of Nagumo's rearming dilemma, is a logistical nightmare. It is packed, wingtip to wingtip, with B-5N Kate bombers. These planes are not empty, they are fully fueled. Next to them are the ordnance carts. On those carts are the 800-kilogram land attack bombs that were never returned to the magazine. And next to those are the Type 91 torpedoes brought up for the anti-ship strike. The air is thick with gasoline fumes from the refueling hoses that are still snaked across the deck. The American bomb is the percussion cap for tons of Japanese high explosives. When it explodes, it doesn't just start a fire. It triggers a chain reaction of unimaginable violence. The 800-kilogram bombs cook off, detonating with a force that blows the hangar walls outward. The torpedo warheads, packed with 600 pounds of explosives, detonate in sympathetic explosions. Whoomp, whump, whump. The fully fueled Kate bombers erupt, spraying flaming gasoline across the entire deck. The fire is so intense, it finds the aviation fuel mains, and the ship's own gasoline supply becomes a high-pressure flamethrower. Within 2 minutes, the Kaga is no longer a warship. It is a self-consuming hell. The 40-ton forward elevator is blown out of its housing and tossed onto the deck like a toy. Miles away, on the Akagi, the flagship, the same horror unfolds, but with even more terrifying speed. At 10:26 a.m., she is hit by only one bomb. It is the bomb from Dick Best's squadron. It strikes the deck edge and detonates in the hangar. The scene is identical. The hangar is full of the planes from the Midway strike that have just landed, and they are being refueled. It is full of the ordnance that was never stored. The single 1,000-pound bomb is all it takes. It ignites the fuel ignites the bombs ignite the torpedoes. On the bridge, Commander Minoru Genda, the man who planned Pearl Harbor, is thrown against a bulkhead. He looks out, and the flight deck in front of him has simply vanished, replaced by a churning inferno. The fires are so instantaneous and so total that the ship's internal water mains are severed before a single fire hose can be charged. Admiral Nagumo, standing just feet away, is frozen. He, a man of rigid procedure, is standing on a ship that is now a lawless, burning wreck. The blast has destroyed his radio room, cutting him off from his fleet. His charts are on fire. His flagship is gone from beneath him. Aides must physically drag him from the bridge, pleading with him to transfer his flag. But he is a man in a daze, muttering, "It cannot be." Simultaneously, the Soryu is struck. The Yorktown's bombers, VB-3, place 3 1,000-pound bombs into her deck. They are perfect hits. One lands in the forward elevator, one in the midship, one aft. They are spaced as if in a textbook diagram. The Soryu is smaller than Akagi or Kaga, and her hangars are just as full. The effect is the same. The ship is torn apart by her own internal explosions. The fires are so catastrophic that at 10:45, just 20 minutes after the first bomb hit, her captain, Ryusaku Yanagimoto, gives the order to abandon ship. He famously refuses to leave, remaining on the bridge to be consumed by the flames, singing his school song. This is the immediate effect. The American mission goal was to damage the Japanese fleet, to stop the invasion of Midway. But what has happened is so much more profound. In 5 minutes, from 10:22 to 10:27 a.m., the offensive power of the Imperial Japanese Navy has been erased. The bombs did not sink these ships. The Japanese did. The American pilots simply lit the fuse. The Kido Butai, the undefeated champion of the Pacific, has been disemboweled by its own unlaunched aircraft, its own unsecured bombs, and its own catastrophic paralysis of command. The smoke is still coiling 20,000 feet into the sky, a vast, greasy funeral pyre for 3 of the world's most powerful warships. You are back in your SBD Dauntless, your fuel gauge now a source of existential terror. You are flying east, praying to find the Enterprise or Yorktown before your engine sputters and dies. But the Battle of Midway is not over. The 5-minute window has closed, but the fight for the Pacific has entered its most desperate, vengeful phase. One carrier has survived. Untouched by your dive bomber squadrons, the Hiryu, Flying Dragon, is alone. Her commander, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, is a different kind of man from Nagumo. He is a true carrier admiral, aggressive, beloved by his men, and now incandescent with rage. He has just witnessed the incineration of his entire fleet in a matter of minutes. He is not paralyzed. He is seeking revenge. At 10:50 a.m., he gives the order: launch all aircraft, target the American carriers. The Hiryu strike force, 18 Val dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters, follows the retreating American SBDS back to their source. They find the Yorktown. You are on the Yorktown, the ghost ship that was never supposed to be here. Her crew, fresh off the 72-hour miracle repair in Pearl Harbor, is now the target of Japan's last lethal gasp. The Vals come screaming down. Your ship's flak batteries are a wall of black smoke and steel, but the Japanese pilots are the best in the world. They are not to be denied. 3 bombs strike the Yorktown. 1 hits midship. 1 flashes down the smokestack, extinguishing her boilers and stopping her dead in the water. The 3rd tears through her flight deck. She is critically wounded, burning and listing. Yet, this is where the legacy of the US Navy is forged. Her damage control teams, in a display of practiced superhuman effort, go to work. They put out the fires, they patch the flight deck. In less than 2 hours, the Yorktown is underway again, making 20 knots, her fires out, ready to recover aircraft. She has, for a second time, defied death. But Yamaguchi is not finished. At 14:30, he launches his last operational aircraft, 10 Kate torpedo bombers. They find the wounded Yorktown. They are met by a curtain of fire, but they press on with the same sacrificial courage as your own VT-8. They drop their torpedoes. 2 fish strike the Yorktown's port side, ripping her open. The order is finally, tragically given: abandon ship. The Hiryu has drawn blood, but in doing so, she has signed her own death warrant. Her returning pilots have given her position away. Admiral Spruance, now in full command of the battle, is relentless. He sends his scouts. They find the Hiryu, and at 1700, a fresh strike of 24 Dauntlesses, a mix of planes from Enterprise and homeless bombers from the Yorktown, arrives over the last Japanese carrier. There are no Zeros left. The Hiryu is defenseless. The SBDS, in a grim methodical display of aerial execution, plant 4 bombs into her deck. The Tinderbox Effect does the rest. She too is engulfed in flames. By morning, the Hiryu is gone. The Kido Butai has ceased to exist. This is the legacy of those 5 minutes. The first and most immediate lesson is the rediscovery of a truth only hinted at in the Coral Sea. The battleship is dead. The aircraft carrier is now the undisputed queen of the seas. Japan's Admiral Yamamoto is nearby on his flagship, the Yamato, the largest, most powerful battleship ever built. 72,000 tons of steel and 18-inch guns. It is completely, utterly, and strategically irrelevant. It never fired a shot in anger. The new doctrine of naval warfare will be written not with cannons, but with 1,000-pound bombs and torpedoes launched from 200 miles away. The second lesson is more profound. The irreplaceable value of the human element. Japan did not just lose 4 carriers, it lost the soul of its naval air arm. Over 100 of Japan's best pilots, the veteran Kessen warriors who had honed their skills for a decade and cut their teeth at Pearl Harbor, were lost. Japan's training philosophy was built on producing a small number of exquisite, godlike aviators. It had no mechanism to mass-produce good ones. The United States, by contrast, had a training pipeline that was just beginning to shift into high gear. America could lose a pilot and replace him with 3 more. Japan's loss of its veteran corps at Midway was a wound from which its naval air power would never, ever recover. The third lesson is one of command and technology. The Japanese naval doctrine, rigid, meticulous, and reliant on perfect planning, was shattered when it met the chaos of battle. Nagumo's Paralysis, his rearming dilemma, became a case study in inflexible command. The Japanese, who had built their carriers as offensive weapons, learned they had fatally ignored defensive design. Their poor damage control and tinderbox hangars were a systemic failure. For the Americans, Midway was the ultimate validation of its single greatest secret weapon, signals intelligence. The men of Station Hypo, who had broken the JN-25 code, were the unseen architects of the entire victory. And so, Midway becomes the turning point. It is a title that is absolute. Before 10:20 a.m. on June 4th, 1942, the Empire of Japan was on the offensive, an unstoppable tide. After 10:27 a.m., it was on the defensive, and it would remain so for the rest of its life. The 5-minute window was not just a battle, it was the high watermark of the Japanese Empire. The strategic initiative had passed, decisively and permanently, into American hands. The road to Guadalcanal, to Iwo Jima, and to Tokyo Bay was paved in those 5 fateful minutes. The smoke clears. The ocean, once churned white by the wakes of admirals and the fury of collapsing ships, returns to its deep, indifferent blue. We are left, in the quiet of the present day, to contemplate the impossible geometry of that morning. We stand in awe not just of the machines, but of the human beings at their center. We see the almost spiritual conviction of a John Waldron, the calculated, career-ending gamble of a Wade McClusky, the cold, logistical paralysis of a Chuichi Nagumo, and the raw, superhuman effort of the damage controlman on the Yorktown. Midway was not a simple victory of good over evil or of one nation over another. It was a victory of flexibility over rigidity, of intuition over doctrine, and in one brief, terrifying moment of sheer, dumb luck. It remains the most stunning and decisive single blow in the history of naval warfare, a 5-minute pivot that changed the world, all resting on the nerve, the skill, and the sacrifice of the pilots and sailors who found themselves at the exact center of history.